Psalm 61 follows a series of 10 psalms of lament. The first of those, Psalm 51, is a lament over David's sin. Psalms 52 through 60 are laments over David's enemies in various situations in his life, including not just personal enemies like Saul and Doeg, but also national enemies like the nation of Edom that attacks Israel by surprise in Psalm 60. So Psalm 61, 2, 3, and 4 are four short psalms of lament and trust. Each of them has varying degrees of lament and elements of trust. This psalm in particular is described as a prayer of or for the king. I'm going to suggest that it is a prayer of the king. David is the king, but he speaks this prayer in the third person at some portion. The psalm begins with a cry for God to listen. Hear my cry, listen to my prayer. From the ends of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. That phrase, ends of the earth, suggests distance, that David feels far from home, and he's distant from God's help. And so his prayer is that God would lead him to the rock that is higher than himself. What a wonderful metaphor. Too often we trust in ourselves, and David is acknowledging here that he needs to trust and lean on someone who is greater than he is. And so Jesus ultimately is the rock, of course, to us as Christians. And David is asking here that God would lead him to a high place, a place that he can look out above all of the conflict and struggle and turmoil that he's dealing with and gain a new perspective, sort of like the joy that we have when we climb to the top of a mountain and we can look out and there is a sense of power and exhilarance and freedom in rising above it all. And that's the sense that I think that David is praying for here. He wants to get above it all. Being in a position of height in military terms gives you not only a place of safety. It's more difficult for arrows and spears and rocks and things to reach you when they get to fire up, but it gives you a position of perspective, reconnaissance. You can look out and you can see your enemy clearly. You can see the lay of the land. You can see beyond your immediate circumstances. So a very rich metaphor, this rock that is higher than ourselves. And that metaphor is extended in verse 3 to that idea of a refuge or a strong tower. A tower functions in a similar way to a high place, to a high rock, and that would be a place of defense, protection against the enemy, as well as a place of offensive power. If you're at a high tower, you can shoot down at your enemies, and you have the advantage. And so this metaphor of God as a high tower is a powerful one. We see it echoed also in Proverbs 18:10, where it says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run into it and are safe." The name of the Lord is when a phrase, the name of the Lord, is used, this means that the person of the Lord, the Lord himself, is a strong tower. And so God's presence, God's identity, these are our source of strength and trust. Then verse 6 brings us into this prayer for the king, prolong the life of the king. And I think David here is praying of himself. He is the king. May his years endure to all generations. May he be enthroned before God forever, steadfast love and faithfulness to watch over him. So David prays on behalf of himself, but others could pray this prayer as well for the king. To dwell in God's tent, verse 4, and shelter under his wings. This is a familiar metaphor. Psalm 27 is very similar to this language as well. This could be a reference to the tabernacle, to the holy place itself where God dwelt on earth, or it could be a more general reference to God as a protective form of a bird protecting its young in the shelter of your wings. Some also, every time they see this shelter of your wings, they also think of the wings of the cherubim that are over the Ark of the Covenant. I don't think that's probably the primary meaning here. I think this is just one of those common metaphors that God is portrayed as a mother bird protecting her young. This is, in technical terms, we call this a zoomorphism, where God or a human is characterized in animal terminology. Concludes with a strong statement of confidence. So I will ever sing praises to your name as I perform my vows day after day. There's two things that are happening there. First, there is the singing, and we saw this in Psalm 57, and we'll see it in the Psalms to come, in these trust Psalms, that the response of the faithful is to sing, is to voice musically praise to God, and then to obey, to perform my vows day after day, to continually obey. As Eugene Peterson says in the title of his book on the Songs of Ascent, it is a long obedience in the same direction, day after day. We put our trust in the name of the Lord, who is a strong tower for us.